All right, I want to kind of close up this chapter, and I want to maybe go through some existing studies and just talk about ways to improve things as well as reviewing. So, a shopping mall wishes to know the attitudes of all shoppers who visit the mall. On a Wednesday morning, the mall places 10 interviewers at a variety of places in the mall and asks a question of shoppers as they pass by. Is this a good study? Probably not. Okay, probably not. How could it be improved? Well, I think maybe the obvious one is vary the times that the people are there. Don't just be out there on Wednesday morning. Ask on weekends, ask at night. So vary the times asking the questions. Could we come up with some kind of randomization here? Probably. Maybe a systematic sample. Remember, systematic is the one where you say, well, I'm going to ask every fifth person that goes by. There are some ways you could maybe add some elements of randomness to it as well. But the biggest thing here is people that shop on a Wednesday morning are retired or they're out of work or something. This is not the average mall goer, right? Okay, a researcher wants to conduct a phone survey to find the proportion of U.S. citizens that do not have a high school diploma. The researcher randomly selects 1,000 phone numbers and calls. What are two potential sources of bias? Well, I think one obvious potential is, and if you remember, we call it response bias. I'm just going to make a note. Might be people just are embarrassed. They might not want to admit that. If they don't have a high school diploma, they might not want to admit that on a phone interview. So we call that response bias. It's any time someone doesn't answer truthfully for some reason. So that's one, I think probably the biggest one. But another, you could probably come up with other sources of bias. Maybe, calling people's phone. What phone? Their cell phone, their home phone. What time are you calling? You could also talk about non-response bias. If you've just picked 1,000 numbers, what kinds of people? Maybe people will refuse to answer. Maybe they don't think it's any of your business. So there are other things in play here, but I think the biggest is probably people not answering truthfully. All right, 1,000 people in a sample is good, but instead of collecting data on the U.S. as a whole, the researcher wants to collect data on each state. How would it be done? Well, this would be a stratified. I'm just going to make a note here. If you remember, this is called a stratified random sample. Okay, I'm going to put just stratified RS. This is where we'd say, okay, we're going to pick, 20 people from each state. And so you go to Minnesota and you randomly pick your 20 people, and then you go to Wisconsin, you randomly pick your 20 people. And the benefit of doing this is then that way we have a breakdown by state. Every state is ensured of being represented in this question. Because if you remember, in a simple random sample, every person has an equal chance of being picked, but so does every group. And based on population, it's very possible that you could get 1,000 people from New York and California, right? And maybe the smaller states wouldn't be represented at all. All right, researchers want to know if biofeedback will reduce the anxiety of people with claustrophobia. To investigate this idea, the researchers teach biofeedback techniques to 37 adult volunteers who have symptoms of claustrophobia. After 6 weeks of training, 29 of the volunteers report a significant reduction in their anxiety. Okay, what's wrong with this experiment? Well, there are lots of things wrong, right? You'll notice my second question is, which is most serious? I hope that you would pick out the most serious thing here is that there is no control. Oh, and I'm spelling that wrong. No control, okay? We have not created a placebo group. We have not created a comparison group. And that's a problem. So, what else? There's no randomness, right? There's no replication. There's no, information given about, the statistical significance in the reduction. Like what kind of numbers go with this? There are lots of things wrong with this experiment. The biggest is that we don't have any control group. All right, let's move on to the review.